Continuing our reading in Yellow Eyes by Rutherford Montgomery, Chapter 18, The Lone Trail. Mr. Sale saw to it that the reputation of the king cougar of Sleepy Cat Mountain grew to large proportions. He related the story of the furious attack of the beast upon him, and in repeating, the story grew. The big fellow was over 12 feet long and weighed 300 pounds. He had leaped upon Mr. Sale and would have torn him to shreds and possibly carried him off if the hunter had not defended himself and driven the killer away. Yellow Eyes had become a man-killer of desperate character, a brute who lurked in the shadows, ready to slay any who ventured across his path. Cougar George grunted disgustingly when he heard the story retold, and Treon, the Native American trapper, shook his head sadly and answered softly, "It could not be true." "It's a fact," a storekeeper assured him. Treon just made one of his few trips to the Crossroads store on the Roaring River for supplies. "Let him alone. He will let you alone," Treon said. He hoisted his pack to his back and strode out of the store. Men riding the lower range carried their rifles with them in hope of getting a shot at the big cat. Few of the cowboys believed the story Mr. Sale told, but each was willing to reap the glory and the reward for killing the cougar. They believed to a man that every cougar should be killed. Cougars sometimes killed calves, and they were notorious for their liking for colt flesh and burro meat. During those days, Yellow Eyes ranged high under the rims of Sleepy Cat Mountain. He did not come down to his old haunting ground, but stayed in the most inaccessible country he could find. His kills consisted of big timberline bucks and mountain sheep. The big bucks were wary fellows, and upon many occasions he failed to get his meat, though he planned carefully and spent hours waiting the proper amount for the moment to watch his screaming attack. His hips healed and the stabbing pains left him. He was as fit as he had ever been. His hunting was more cunning and wary. Never did he hunt by day or late in the morning light. He came out of his sleeping quarters after the sun had set and hunted in the half light, as do the great owls and the lobo wolf. Indeed, his lot was cast with the big lobo he so often met. The king wolf had defied Cougar George's traps and poison for 7 years. He had ravaged and killed, refusing to be driven from the range he knew. Yellow Eyes was beginning to learn the cunning of the big wolf. He was developing the hard hatred which drove the big lobo to unnecessary kills. With the healing of his injuries, he began to hunt lower down the slopes. He learned that he could descend into the low valleys by night and return to his mountain fastness to sleep during the day. It was on one of these trips that he passed the pasture where Cougar George kept his pack burros. The night was lighted by a golden moon, and the air was still and cold. Heavy dew drenched the grass and sparkled in the open meadows. Cougar George was away with his pack, trailing the big lobo wolf. That night, he was camped on the west fork of the Roaring River. Yellow Eyes learned of the hunter's absence and of the absence of the pack by circling the cabin several times. The pasture attracted him. He had a strong craving for burro meat. Ever since the day he had feasted upon the burro colt owned by Cougar George, he had longed to come upon another of the shaggy animals. He slid under the pole fence to the windward of the feeding burros. Slipping through the grass, he worked his way toward a yearling jenny. He spent an hour in this approach, always watching, moving a few feet, and then waiting and listening, sniffing the air intently. When he was within 10 feet of the burro, he gathered himself for a leap. His muscles steeled and knotted, and his belly flattened. With a scream, he launched his attack. His leap landed him on the back of the burro. The power of his plunging attack crushed the little beast to the ground. With raking hind feet and ripping forepaws, he clung to the fallen prey. Then his lance-like fangs found a vital spot, the great jugular, and the burro ceased to struggle. With fine defiance toward Cougar George, the great cat feasted within sight of the cabin. This raid would have made even the Lobo wolf envious for its daring. Yellow Eyes had taken the offensive in a manner calculated to arouse the deepest ire in Cougar George. When the feast was over and the king cat was glutted with meat, he kicked grass and weeds upon the carcass and slipped out of the corral. The terrified group of burros huddled at the gate leading to the shed beside the cabin, and they were wildly glad to see him go. Here his kill differed from that of the Lobo. The gray one would have pulled down at least 2 more of the helpless animals had he been making the raid. He would have done it in a savage defiance of the man he hated. But Yellow Eyes had satisfied his hunger, and he had no desire to kill more than he wanted for food. He would not go back to finish the carcass, and he would not make more than 1 kill at a time. That was his way, and he kept to it. In the cave high on the weathered side of Sleepy Cat, he forgot about Cougar George and his hounds. He forgot about the raid he had made. Selecting a spot near the entrance to the cave, he lay down and went to sleep. The sun rose and wheeled westward while he slept. But he did not waken. He was certain of his security and slumbered soundly. 2 days later, Mr. Sale and his friends arrived at Cougar George's cabin ready for the big hunt. Cougar George was lamenting the loss of his burro and ready to take the trail at once. Mr. Sale laughed at the hunter's anger. "He sure walked right in and spit in your face," he said. "I'll get him this time," Cougar George promised darkly. "We have 10 Airedales, regular bear dogs. They'll tear that cat to bits," Mr. Sale boasted. "They'll kill him if they catch up with him, but he's not a cripple no more," Cougar observed. The Airedales gave voice to their sentiments in a burst of howls. They wanted to get at Cougar's hounds and fight with them. The man who owned the wire hair hunters shook his head. "I doubt if we can make them run together," he said. You'll have to keep the Airedales under leash," Mr. Sale said. The man laughed and Cougar joined him. Sale looked angry. The man sobered and explained. "This is a tough assignment. These dogs are supposed to be mean. They're so mean they'll tackle a bear on sight. I could no more hold 10 of them on a rope than you could hold that lion with your bare hands." "Well, figure it out," Mr. Sale growled. "I want to be in and see the finish." Cougar George and the men walked away to discuss the possible methods of working the 2 packs without having trouble. Mr. Sale joined his friends in the cabin. He had not asked for the privilege of shooting the king cat, and he did not intend to request it, unless it could be done from a safe place. An hour later, Cougar George entered the cabin. He sat down beside Mr. Sale and spoke in a low voice. There's a fellow lives up above me who could spot the cat. If he could locate the cat, well, we could use them Airedales on him and would not have to take the trail hounds along." "Why don't you see him about it?" Mr. Sale asked. He don't like me none too well. If you went to him and asked him," Cougar George paused suggestively. "I might be able to bribe him, huh?" Cougar George nodded. "I'll have him working for us as soon as I see him," Mr. Sale promised. And so it happened that Treon had 2 visitors the next day. Cougar George and Mr. Sale rode up to see him. They dismounted, and he met them in front of his cabin. "Hello," he greeted them. He preferred the language of his people because of its simplicity, though he had been educated in the government school and spoke English. "Hello, my man," Mr. Sale said with a smile. Cougar George said nothing. He just stood and waited. "I know this boy," Mr. Sale went on. "We met him last winter when we skied over the rim." "Sure," Treon agreed. "I came up to give you get you help to to run us that man-killing lion that lives in these parts? Mr. Sale began. There is no man-killing lion in the hills, Trian answered softly. Didn't you hear about the yellow brute that attacked me a month ago? Mr. Sale asked. I heard, Trian said. Well, that's the one. You cornered the big cat and would have killed him. He fights for his life, Trian said quietly. He's a menace to life and property. He killed a burro for Cougar George the other night. Trian's calm reassurance nettled Mr. Sale. And so? Trian smiled widely. I'll give you $50 to spot the cat for us. Mr. Sale was getting impatient. No, Trian said and turned away. Wait a minute, Mr. Sale called. Trian half turned. How do you make a living in a season trapping? How much? Sometimes $400. Last winter, $200. Trian answered truthfully. Trapping is getting worse, huh? Too many people, animals go back. They leave. The government kills them. Trian spoke shortly. I'll give you $500 to spot the big cat. Mr. Sale was beaming again. Trian looked at him thoughtfully for a full minute. No, he said definitely. You cannot hire me. Mr. Sale stared at him. It was his turn to think. Was the man a fool? He shrugged his shoulders and turned to Cougar George. And we might as well go on back. Cougar George said, Yeah, ain't no use. But he traps and kills animals. I can't figure it out. Mr. Sale shook his head. They don't make no sense, Cougar George said with evident disgust. They all act that way. Mr. Sale agreed, but he still did not understand. Cougar George outlined his plans as they rode down the mountain. Yeah, we'll have to hold on to them Airedales and let the hounds start with the tomcat. Then maybe we can get the wire hairs into action. It's our only chance. That's the end of chapter 18.